Somewhere in the Colorado Rockies, at about 8,000 feet above sea level, a man fires up a brand new 4,000-watt generator for the first time. A machine that, unknown to him, will lose 3.5% of its rated power for every 1,000 feet of elevation above sea level. He bought it online, drove it up from Denver in the bed of his truck, and connected it to his cabin the way the manual told him to. The fridge starts. A few lights come on. Then he plugs in a space heater, and the generator stumbles. The lights dim, the engine bogs down, and after a few seconds, the overload protection trips. He checks the oil, full. He checks the fuel, fresh. He reads the spec sheet again, 4,000 watts, right there on the sticker. So he calls the manufacturer, and the person on the other end asks him a question he didn't expect. What's your elevation? Buried deep in the owner's manual, usually somewhere around page 13 in a paragraph most people never reach, there's a line that changes everything. It says that for every 1,000 feet of elevation above sea level, the engine loses roughly 3.5% of its rated power. At 8,000 feet, that 4,000-watt generator doesn't make 4,000 watts. It makes about 2,700. The sticker on the front was never wrong. It just assumed you'd be standing near the ocean when you read it. That 3.5% figure isn't a rough estimate. It's the number that shows up, almost word for word, across the technical documentation of every major manufacturer. Honda publishes it in a dedicated carburetor bulletin. Generac prints it on the spec sheets of its Guardian standby line, including the Guardian 7209 and the 7043, two of the most common home standby units installed along the Front Range. Westinghouse puts it in the WGen 12,000 owner's manual with a blunt note. This is a natural occurrence and cannot be adjusted by engine. The math is simple, and it compounds fast. Denver sits at 5,280 feet. At 3.5% per thousand, a generator sold in Denver is already operating at roughly 80% of whatever the label says, before anyone loads a single appliance onto it. Drive an hour into the mountains and park at 7,000 feet, and you're down to about 75%. At a ski cabin near 9,000 feet, the loss pushes past 30%. A 5,000-watt unit at that altitude produces closer to 3,400 usable watts. This is why installers along Colorado's Front Range corridor routinely oversize standby generators by 20 to 35% compared to what the same house would need in Houston or Miami. A load calculation that calls for 12 kilowatts at sea level might need a 16 or 18 kilowatt unit in the foothills. And that load calculation should account for every major appliance on the automatic transfer switch, since the switch itself determines what the generator is asked to carry the moment utility power fails. The sizing chart in the brochure doesn't account for altitude. The installer's experience does. I think that's the part most people miss. Not that the power loss exists, but that it's large enough to change what you need to buy. To understand why this happens, think of the engine as a machine that scoops air. Every time a piston moves down on its intake stroke, it fills the cylinder with exactly the same volume of air, the same cup, every time. At sea level, that cup is full of dense, heavy air packed tight with oxygen molecules. At 8,000 feet, the cup is the same size, but the air inside it weighs less. The atmospheric pressure at that altitude is about 11.5 pounds per square inch instead of the 14.7 you get at sea level. There are simply fewer oxygen molecules in every scoop. That matters because an engine doesn't burn air, it burns oxygen, and at 8,000 feet, every cup of air contains about 20% less of it. The fuel system doesn't know that. It keeps spraying the same amount of gasoline into a space that no longer has enough oxygen to burn it all. The result is a weaker explosion inside the cylinder, less force pushing the piston down, and ultimately fewer watts coming out of the outlet. Propane and dual fuel generators follow the same physics, with one small distinction worth knowing. Propane has a slightly lower energy density than gasoline to begin with, so a dual fuel unit running on LP at elevation is starting from a marginally lower baseline. Champion Power Equipment, which sells a number of dual-fuel portable generators popular in mountain communities, documents the same 3.5% per thousand feet derating across both fuel modes. The fuel type doesn't change the atmosphere. It just changes where you started before the atmosphere started taking its share. No part in the engine has failed. Nothing is worn or clogged or broken. The atmosphere itself has imposed a ceiling on what the machine can produce, and that ceiling drops with every foot of elevation gained. The engine is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's just doing it with less to work with. This is where most people make an expensive assumption. They search online for generator high-altitude fix and find something called a high-altitude jet kit. It costs about $12, and it's a small brass carburetor jet, slightly narrower than the stock one, that reduces the amount of fuel the engine pulls in per cycle. The thinking is intuitive. If there's less oxygen up here, send in less fuel to match, and the engine will run properly again. And that part is true. Installing the correct jet does restore the air-fuel ratio. The engine stops running rich. It idles more smoothly, fouls fewer spark plugs, and meets EPA Clean Air Act requirements for small engines operating in high-altitude counties, which is actually the legal reason the kit exists. Federal regulation under EPA small engine rules requires manufacturers to make these kits available for high-altitude counties, and installing one with the right part number is not considered tampering. In states where CARB compliance also applies, the same altitude jet requirements extend to California Air Resources Board certification standards as well. But here is what the kit does not do. It does not bring back the missing watts. Honda states this directly in its carburetor jetting bulletin. Even with the correct high-altitude jet installed, engine horsepower will still decrease by roughly 3.5% per thousand feet. Westinghouse says the same. The kit makes the engine run cleaner on the oxygen it has. It cannot manufacture oxygen that isn't there. The generator will sound better, it will last longer, and it will still produce 2,700 watts at 8,000 feet instead of 4,000. The sticker hasn't changed. So, if the kit doesn't solve it, what does? The most reliable answer is also the least elegant. Buy a bigger generator. If your cabin sits at 8,000 feet and your load calculation says you need 3,000 watts, divide that number by 0.7, because that's roughly what the engine will actually deliver up there. You need a unit rated for at least 4,300 watts at sea level. The second option costs more upfront, but solves the problem at its source. Fuel-injected inverter generators use an electronic control unit that reads oxygen levels and air pressure in real time and adjusts the fuel flow automatically. There's no jet to swap, no manual tuning. The engine compensates for altitude on its own, not perfectly, but significantly better than a fixed carburetor ever could. Honda's EU 7000IS is one of the more common fuel-injected inverter generator units that shows up in mountain homes for exactly this reason. The inverter generator design also produces cleaner power output with lower total harmonic distortion, which matters if you're running sensitive electronics at the cabin alongside the space heater. For RV owners navigating mountain passes and high-elevation campgrounds, the altitude derating problem is just as real and considerably less discussed. The Cummins Onan Marquis Gold Series, one of the most widely installed RV generator lines in North America, derates at the same 3.5% per thousand feet above 3,000 feet that every other gasoline engine does. An RV owner who buys a 5,000-watt Onan unit and drives it to a campground at 9,000 feet in the Rockies is running closer to 3,200 watts before they plug anything in. Most of them find out the same way the man in the Colorado cabin did. For larger standby and industrial systems, the answer is turbocharging. A turbocharger forces compressed air into the intake, partially restoring the oxygen density the altitude took away. A turbocharged diesel at 8,000 feet might lose 5 to 8% of its rated power instead of 30. That's why mining operations in the Andes and military forward bases in Afghanistan didn't try to fix thin air with a smaller jet. They engineered around it, forced more air in, and let the physics work in their favor instead of against it. That man in the Colorado Rockies didn't buy the wrong generator. He didn't get a defective unit or a weak engine. He got exactly what was advertised, a machine rated under conditions that don't exist where he lives. And that's the quiet truth about altitude derating. It's not a flaw or a malfunction. It's the atmosphere doing what it always does at elevation, thinning out, carrying less oxygen, and quietly reducing what any combustion engine can deliver. The generator doesn't know it's on a mountain. It just knows there's less to burn. Every manufacturer documents this. Almost none of them put it on the box. The number on the sticker is real. It was just measured at sea level in a controlled lab under conditions most mountain owners will never see. And by the time you find the footnote that explains the difference, you're usually already standing in the dark, wondering why your generator can't keep up. If you're buying a generator for anywhere above 3,000 feet, the single most important thing you can do is ignore the number on the front and read the page they hoped you'd skip.